and welcome to Access Granted. This is the podcast all about accessibility in video games and the conversations around them. I'm Steve Saylor, the host, and I've got a very special bonus episode today. I wish it was coming in sort of like a fun, frivolous and hilarious sort of manner, but today's a little bit of a deep discussion in regards to accessibility and difficulty modes. Yes, that conversation has come up again, and I have not just myself talking about this, but I also have a panel of amazing people that we'll be talking about it today. So we'll start off with introducing each other. Grant, why don't you go first?
Hi, I'm Grant. I'm the co-owner slash mobility editor of Can I Play That? And I'm also a freelancer with bylines in IGN and the Washington Post.
Cool. And I should say as well, this podcast is also in partnership with caniplaythat.com. We'll be sort of cross-promoting each other in this one as we feel like it's important for at least us to be able to kind of partner up with this. And so we also have Cherry with us. Cherry, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi there. I'm a games developer and accessibility specialist. Until recently, I was freelance and have worked on projects like Marvel's Avengers, Dreams, some unnamed IPs at places like Guerrilla Games. I'll soon be starting at Ubisoft. And so, yeah, that's me.
Cool. And John, why don't you go next?
Hey, yeah, I'm John. I'm the creator and co-host of a positivity-focused gaming podcast called Super Deluxe Gamescast. I've also dabbled in freelance journalism. I've got bylines at Polygon, GameDaily.biz, and IGN. And I'm everybody's game dad. So
I love it.
That's kind of what I do.
I just love it. We have three people who have bylines at the same place, IGN, which is awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, so we're gonna be talking about an article that was posted in Kotaku. So I'll be reading a little bit of it just to kind of give some context as far as what our conversation is going to be about today. But it was an article in regards to Final Fantasy VII. And it's called, currently the article was labeled as the difference between Final Fantasy VII's easy and normal modes is too drastic. However, the original article was labeled as the Final Fantasy VII Remake's easy mode is way too easy. I won't read the full article. If you want to be able to go to Kotaku, if you want to read it, it's up to you. I'll give you at least the gist of it. It was written by Mike Fahey. It was posted on April 10th. And basically it says, combat in Final Fantasy VII Remake, especially when facing powerful boss battles, involves juggling normal and special attacks, destructive and healing magics, and strategic exploiting enemy weaknesses. Unless you're playing in easy mode, then it's just button mashing bullshit. I spent 40 hours playing through Final Fantasy VII Remake, mostly on normal mode, the highest difficulty initially available. A no items hard mode unlocks after completing the game once. I burned through potions and character reviving Phoenix Downs as I battled robots, mutant creatures, and Shinra soldiers. I was forced to repeat many of the game's boss battles after my party wiped, regrouping, switching out weapons and material to make sure my characters had the right tools at their disposal. It was challenging, but never dull. Then came the dogs. Towards the end of the game, there's an encounter with a bunch of Shinra bloodhounds. It's not a boss fight, just a regular encounter between Aerith, Tifa, and a bunch of genetically modified puppers. The two characters, separated from the rest of the party, were quickly overwhelmed by snapping canine jaws again and again. There were just too many of them. I barely had time to get their ATB gauges to the point where they could use some items or cast spells. As Jason Schreier mentioned in his incredibly helpful tips post, there is no shame in switching to easy mode for this battle. After reloading the game from over screen 5 times, that's exactly what I did. The dogs, which tore my people apart time and time again, went down in under 30 seconds in easy mode. I didn't use spells, I didn't use special abilities, I barely had time to do so. Basic attacks, highly ineffective in normal difficulty mode, ripped through those doggies apart like they were tissue paper. I'm going to jump down a sec. I'm the last person to shy away from playing a game on easy, but Final Fantasy VII's Remake easy mode is a joke. And it's not even the game's easiest setting. Classic mode is easy mode. Only your character attacks and defends automatically. It might as well be a visual novel. If you want to fully appreciate Final Fantasy VII Remake's nuanced and versatile battle system, play in normal mode. Except for the dogs, those damn murderous dogs. And there was an update posted on April 10th at 2:45 p.m. This article's original headline, Final Fantasy VII Remake's easy mode is way too easy, has been changed to better convey our writer's issue with this particular easy mode. So that's the article in question. Obviously, it blew up on Twitter over the past couple of days. And Grant and I thought it would be best to sit down, discuss it, and have a panel discussion about difficulty modes, about the article in question. But Grant, I wanted to start off with you and ask you, because I think you've interacted with the author of this article, correct?
So we had a brief Twitter exchange. I wouldn't really go into it and say we've interacted, but I'm coming at this from the perspective of a journalist, which I understand this is Mike's opinion, right? I get that. But the thing that really bothered me about this is, rather than either apologize or simply just not make the argument, he kept digging deeper and deeper and deeper, as if trying to justify it, without essentially reading the room. Because this argument has been going on for, what, a full year now? About easy mode in video games? And all the press knows, like, how much attention it draws.
Yeah. I agree. Cherry, what are your thoughts?
It's a conversation that's actually been going on for many, many years in games accessibility specifically. It crops up every now and then. When it first became like really big news was with Cuphead. It was on and off before then even, but Cuphead was the first time that like the games press started paying attention to it and kind of doing the subject a little bit of disservice, which I think is what this article is for me. So plug. I also have an IGN byline.
I was going to get to that. But go ahead.
Yeah, we all do apparently. But yeah, so the article I wrote on this really looks at how talking about difficulty modes in like a more nuanced fashion does the topic a lot more justice. So I actually don't think that this article is flat out wrong. Like I'm one of those people that's like, I understand the point that's trying to be made, and I know what they're talking about from a game design perspective. And it is very interesting as a game designer in that difficulty is really about the feel of the game. It's not really about like difficulty isn't a quantifiable thing. It's relative to the individual. It's not really the thing that people think it is. It's not as solid a concept as a lot of people seem to give it weight. Like they think it's totally objective, but it's really not. It's a very subjective feeling that you get when you're playing a game. And so I think what the article is trying to say is that there needs to be a step between the easy mode and the normal mode. And I think that's kind of what is the good part of the article, that like I think there is some discussion in there that the feel isn't right for a lot of people. But what it ignores is the wider experience of different types of interaction. And it kind of comes from this perspective that everyone's the same, which obviously we know is really not true.
Right. John?
So, like, right off the bat, I want to lead with, I've got a healthy amount of respect for Mike Fahey, both as a journalist and as a person. I don't think obviously he wasn't trying to be malicious or anything. I mean, it was the way I took it. One, the original title of the article was bad. It was just a bad title, and I actually don't think it did the actual meat and potatoes of what it was saying any justice. Or any favors anyway. So I've reread the article a few times to kind of gather my thoughts on it. And I'm pretty much where Cherry's at. I don't necessarily think it's the message he's trying to give so much as the way he gave it. Because easy like a huge gap between a normal mode and an easy mode, I can see how that would rub some people the wrong way. Or, I could see how some people were saying, well, man, wow, there's a huge disparity there. Like, why does normal feel, so grueling and as opposed to easy mode where I don't have to, I really do anything at all. Having said that, I think where the problem comes into play is, I've got a lot of friends in the disabled community who, without that easy mode, would not be able to play Final Fantasy VII Remake. Because I'm playing on a normal, and it's not an easy game. It's no Dark Souls, but again, like you've got to have basically, in order to play normal mode effectively, you have to have full faculties of your fingers and your hands. And I mean, it's something that you can't just, pick up and play potentially if you are a disabled individual. However, that easy mode being as easy as it is, I personally don't really see the problem. Especially if you're going to play the whole game on normal anyway, and then switch over to easy mode to beat the 5 dogs or whatever it was. And then switch back. Like I'm not sure that's the best way to make your argument. Like I get what he's trying to say. I get the point he's trying to make, but I don't think he's using good examples to make that point. And in the meantime, the really important signals are getting lost in the noise, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Kind of even put my own sort of personal take on it, is that I'm currently playing Final Fantasy VII Remake right now, and I've been sort of hovering back and forth between normal and easy mode. And there was one point where I was playing normal mode. It's if you play the game, I won't spoil it too much, but there's a point in chapter 5 where you're in the tunnels, and there's one particular encounter where you're faced against 2 guys with flamethrowers and then 2 gun turrets. On normal, I was dying like after 30 seconds, like every 30 seconds, like I did it, like I was trying to be able to get past it like 5 times, and I still couldn't even get one person or one enemy down within that period of time before my entire party was wiped. And so then I switched back to easy mode, and within about 30 to 40 seconds, it was basically I completed the encounter. And there was a period where I was close to losing a few of my party members, but it was I was enough for me to be able to get past that particular point. And I do see where this article is trying to be able to say that at least according to to Mike who wrote it. And again, I'm not bashing him in any way, shape, or form. I do see where he's coming from, because I also see that disparity in it, and I'm not upset by it. I'm like, okay, you know what? Perfect. It's this, by doing what I did, is exactly how I would prefer to be playing at least this particular game. The option was there to be able to change the difficulty at any given point. You can, as long as you do it before you enter an encounter. You can't do it while you're doing an encounter, but you can do it right. Like if you die, you can basically come back, change the difficulty level, and then go back in and go through the encounter, which is great. Not a lot of games offer that. Basically, like a lot of times, you set a difficulty at the beginning of the game, you're done. That's it. That's the difficulty mode. Whereas with this, Square Enix was able to put in that option. And as well, I do see that normal is not necessarily like John said. It's not an easier time.
It can be a very challenging game, like on normal mode. It really is.
Yeah, and I definitely saw that for sure. Especially like there was several encounters with more multiple bigger kind of enemies than it is with some of the smaller, like say the swamp rats or whatever. Like they're in the slums, right, like at the beginning of the game. But I do see where that, like I saw what Mike was saying, but I think that the tone of how it was read and how it was written, I think was a little bit off, especially the easy mode is a joke, and obviously with the original title of the article, and I sort of I definitely, I don't know, it's one of those, I know it's rearing the ugly head of the debate between how difficulty modes can affect accessibility. So I don't know, I don't know. I leave it up to the group. Should we really kind of dive into it, especially with like Sekiro, or to provide context, or should we? What are your all thoughts?
Yeah, I think the thing to remember is that there's a lot of outrage in how this is presented a lot of the time, and I don't think that outrage is necessarily justified. But I think it's just a misdirected mismatch of what people's expectations of something is versus what they get. And this is a constant battle from a game design perspective, is that how do you manage player expectations with how you're balancing your game? And And I think that this ability to switch difficulty modes is like a totally legitimate way to play, especially when you actually consider the original Final Fantasy VII, which was a really difficult game. I remember staying up all night with friends, hours and hours and hours, just like same boss fights over and over and over, trying different summons and like different party layouts. And I think that is what like normal is trying to achieve. And I think that's where naming conventions are really difficult, because like what is normal to one person versus someone else? And what did the game designers try to achieve with that? Were they trying to recreate the original feel of Final Fantasy VII and its really challenging aspects? And I think those are interesting things to look at. Outside of the outrage, like I think the outrage is the thing that's the most upsetting and has been the thing that has like kind of come and gone in this conversation, that unfairly targets disabled players especially. And I think there's ways to look at it ignoring that outrage, if that makes sense.
I mean, I can tell you right now, every single complaint I've ever heard about this game doesn't need an easy mode, or hey, look, some games just aren't for everyone, and that's okay. Every single person I've ever heard utter a statement like that has been a person with complete physical, not a disabled person. They've been a completely abled person. I've never heard that argument from a disabled person. And I think that's very telling. Games should be for everybody. There's no reason that anybody shouldn't be able to play a game, period. I'm not a fan of gatekeeping, and as somebody who has total control over his facilities, I want as many disabled individuals as possible to be able to enjoy the same kind of games that I do. Nobody's forcing you to, nobody's forcing you to play easy mode. Nobody's forcing you to do it. So don't force people to play normal mode if they don't want to. I mean, to me, it's as simple as that.
I think, yeah, it's about reducing that stigma, right? And that's something I think Grant has looked at a lot, right? Like you've looked at the stigma around like this naming and the things people expect.
Right. So I interviewed Josh Straub, I believe that's how you say his name, for one of my pieces, and he said there's nothing worse than a good game that you can't play than a bad game that you can. So there has to be a fine line between accessibility features that work. And in my experience, I found the best features are ones that are completely optional.
Mm-hmm.
But once you can choose to switch on and off, you don't need to play with them. You still get the same experience as everyone else. And going off what John said about the people who usually criticize that movement, to add on to the hypocrisy, they're also the same ones who will post videos and posts and threads about how to exploit certain game mechanics.
Yeah.
To win anyway.
Yep. Or the people, Grant, there's also, oh, this boss is too hard, or this section sucks, it's unfair,
Yep.
It's too difficult. But then again, at the same time, well, this game doesn't need an easy mode. And it's like, well, hold on a minute. Like, right. I mean, you can't, you can either have, it's not, one or the other, right? Like either it doesn't need an easy mode or it's too hard. Like pick one.
Mm-hmm. I think as well too, it's like, it kind of brings in the whole, because especially with this game, like Final Fantasy VII is a beloved game, not only just within the Final Fantasy franchise, but a beloved game in gaming history. And this is definitely a game that is like the Square Enix wants to be able to have as many people play as possible. So I totally see that, like that's why they kind of added this mode in. They want to be able to have it accessible for as many people as possible. I'm personally, and I think I'm with Cherry in this one. I also personally am not a fan of the easy moniker or the easy, normal, and hard in regards to difficulty levels. I see a lot of comments, at least on Twitter, that it should story mode would have been a more
accessibility mode, like.
Well, I have issues with that too.
Oh, okay.
So the reason I don't like using the word accessibility is many different folds. the main one is that there are a lot of people that don't think accessibility is for them, and so they avoid anything titled accessibility. They either don't think to even try it, or they don't look at it, or it's just stigmatized. And I think it is stigmatized. I think that by labeling some things as for disabled players and everything else as for others, stigmatizes disabled players even more than they are already. And I think we should be avoiding that and being really cognizant of the ethics of how we approach these things. I much prefer things like, if we're going to look at like modes that are specifically to assist people, then I think assist mode is a good title that Celeste used. And Celeste used it in a really interesting way in that it wasn't labeled difficulty, because I think the difficulty with difficulty is that like I said, it's a feel for people, and it's not really quantifiable thing, even though it's become kind of so used that people expect it to be a particular thing. And that's where managing player expectation comes in. So if it's a mode that's specifically tailorable, then assist mode is great. But I think there are other ways to name these where it could just be creative. Like, it doesn't even need to be descriptive necessarily, because descriptions carry with them a weight of expectation. And the problem with that is that, like, someone's expectation of what feels easy or feels difficult or normal is so different. And that's true for kind of a lot of different naming conventions. So I'm actually much more of a fan of approach where you just throw all that out the window and you rely on creative naming, like Jedi Fallen Order used, or in the indie sphere, Way of the Passive Fist, where it was just like a really fun, silly name. And then you make sure you have a really good descriptor of the parameters for players to understand what those modes mean. Because the thing about difficulty modes is, from a design perspective, what they actually are is they're basically Tupperware containers. They hold various different parameters that designers tweak and try different kind of adjustments in order to recreate or in order to create the feel that they expect players to experience. And then they tweak that through playtesting and even in-office testing and things. And exposing that to the player can really go a long way. You don't have to expose everything. You don't need to show your underwear, but like you can, too many metaphors today. But I think that that's the most important part, is how you describe it and how you present it. The naming really doesn't matter. I think it's almost better to do away with expectant names like easy and normal.
Right. And that's the thing too. I think it's like, I think the easy, normal, and hard has been basically a mainstay within the video game industry for decades now. And I'm on the personal, I think that, those definitely, those terms need to go away. We're slowly seeing that, like you said, with Jedi Fallen Order and with Celeste and with Way of the Pacifist. Like, we're starting to kind of see that as a pop up. And I was thinking about it. Like, this kind of brings up an interesting sort of scenario. Do you think that in this particular case, is it possibly a cultural / translation issue? Because at least the conversations we've been having about difficulty options has been from games from Japan. Now, I'm not knocking, obviously, Japanese developers. They create some of the best games that we've ever seen in video game history. Do you think that there is a bit maybe of like a cultural divide between that and I guess the sort of the Western, to use a non really great descriptive term, but do you think that there's a difference there, or do you think that it's just it really is just kind of like depending on it's the in-studio culture?
I think I'm wary to put those assumptions on studios that we don't really know much about, that are very secretive, and lots of things happen behind closed doors, and they're not very public with their studio culture and their creating culture. I think we have to be careful not to assume too much about game development. And I think that actually is where a lot of these arguments get a little bit heated. And I'm going to say, like, flat out kind of toxic, is that that there is so much assumption on what intentions are, or what developers want to do, or all of this. And as a developer, I can tell you most of the time people are wrong. Like sometimes in a nice way, like sometimes like, oh yeah, we really pulled off the magic there. But like sometimes in a way that like is kind of crushing because you're trying so hard to do the right thing. You're trying so hard to make this feel good for players and be fun and like be everything they expected. And then you don't. And like you see that disappointment, you see that outrage. And I would be much more happy with saying that like maybe Japanese studios have looked at North American games and been like, okay, what are these modes called generally, and like what do people expect, and so that's why they go with the naming. And like I want to say that is that like there's nothing like fully wrong with using easy, normal, hard, or however, because it is what people expect, and it has become like a really common thing in the industry ever since like the 90s, maybe even the 80s. And so like I think we have to be careful about assumptions. Sorry.
No, that's fair, and that's what I was thinking. Like, I was wondering, I was leaning more towards like the translation side. It's just, and I think you nailed it. It could be just they saw what Western audiences sort of call those difficulty modes and just went with that. John, I know that you're one of the biggest JRPG fans that I know. Do you see that, or do you have any thoughts on that at all?
Honestly, I don't really have the knowledge base, I think, to answer that in a very intelligent manner, and so I'll plead the fifth as opposed to embarrassing myself.
That's fair. Grant, what are your thoughts?
I think Japanese development studios get a lot of bad press from the accessibility community, saying that a lot of their games aren't accessible and that they aren't trying or that they won't listen. But specifically with the Nintendo Switch, we've seen that's not really true. There are so many games on the Switch which are so well done, and they're so easy in a good way, and they're so complex with their accessibility options that I really think the industry, from a Western perspective, needs to move away from bashing Japanese developers, because they really do a lot in terms of accessibility.
I will say this though, Grant, there are games on the Nintendo Switch, like Super Mario Party, for example, that I think are probably virtually unplayable for a lot of disabled individuals. So I was there was Super Mario Party and another one. I can't remember what it was, but I mean with Super Mario Party in particular, I mean you pretty much are required to use the Joy-Cons. And you've got to move around, you've got to be standing on your feet at times, you have to have this whole range of movement that a lot of people just simply don't have, and I don't think they're like, for games like that, I think the Switch, like, I agree with you. I think there are a lot of games on the Switch that have really gone the extra mile to focus on accessibility and ensure that everybody can play the game. At the same time, I think the Switch is a double-edged sword in the sense that it is also incredibly easy to make a game on the Switch that is playable for somebody like me, but completely inaccessible for somebody who suffers from any form of physical immobility.
I think that's true of all development, right? Like we can't really generalize for an entire company, especially not the giants like Nintendo or PlayStation or Xbox, because there's so many different departments, so many different arms, everyone's doing their thing, and I think no one anywhere is really hitting it full on for accessibility yet. Like no one's got there. I think we're getting there. I think the ball is definitely rolling now. It's a really hot topic, and that really helps with selling it to people that need to be on board to make it happen. But I think that it is really hard to generalize. Like even if you look at PlayStation and Xbox, there's things that they do really, really well, and then things that they don't do so well. And I think that's true of everyone. And definitely it can feel really hard when you see, like, I remember Mario Party being one of my favorite things when I was young. Like I loved it on the N64 and I was so excited. I was like, but I always injured myself because I injure really easily and that's part of my disabilities. And so I was like, how are they going to, like, in the modern world, make a Mario Party that I can play without injuring myself? And then they didn't. And that can be really, really hard to see for sure. But part of that is because, like, they are different studios. Like, it's a different studio making Mario Party to, say another Nintendo title. So, and different teams even within a studio, and that can be really hard.
And that's even with Pokemon, one of the most established Nintendo franchises, like, took a different direction with Let's Go, and that was the first game in the series that was entirely inaccessible to me. And then with Sword and Shield, they brought it back to its roots.
Yeah.
So I was once again able to jump in and play it.
I think it's also too is that there's nothing more disappointing than being able to being excited for a game that your friends are going to be playing from day one, and they're going to be and they're enjoying it, and you can't play because of some form a disability that you may have. And I've had that happen to me many a times in of course my video game playing life, and as I'm certain a few for you as well. And yeah, I think Nintendo is definitely one of those that you're right. It's sort of like a double-edged sword. It definitely they do well in regards to accessibility, but they're sort of missing some of the important parts of the accessibility in that it's just. And I think Sharon, I think you and I both called it's accidental accessibility in some cases, and I think. Yeah, definitely. Obviously, we're seeing that conversation be brought up more now than ever. But I think definitely, at least of the big three, there definitely are more advances in accessibility over the past several years, and than there have been in a long time, which is amazing to see. And even kind of bringing it around to this particular sort of discourse. I don't know about the rest of you, but from what I saw. Online, there hasn't been as much pushback as I seen previously when this sort of topic came up. Has any of you guys seen that at all, or no?
I mean, Grant. No, Grant. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
From the able-bodied perspective, or do you mean? From disability.
Well, I'll say this: I don't know, maybe it's just my feed has been curated more than most. I haven't I think I've seen from able-bodied and from the disabled community have been really kind of basically saying in this particular article that that they're pushing more for accessibility than previous conversations about difficulty.
I think in this instance, Final Fantasy is such a beloved genre or franchise has been accessible, air quotes, to everyone. So I don't think there's much of an issue. But if you were to say Dark Souls, for example, or that has a very elitist mindset and attitude, that's where, in my experience, toxicity comes up.
I think I'm the only Dark Souls, because I've put 500 hours into Dark Souls, probably 400 hours into the sequel, probably about 500 hours into Dark Souls 3, probably about 500 hours into Bloodborne, and I'm one of those people who's like, yeah, bring the easy mode on. I don't care. It's not going to affect my enjoyment of the game, or I just won't use it. Other people will find it very useful, I'm sure. So I just don't see the big deal. As far as this particular article goes, I have seen a lot of unified voices kind of criticizing the article, but unfortunately, I see it for two different reasons. One, on one side, you've got individuals like all of us here who are like, okay, maybe now we can have a meaningful discussion on ableism and accessibility in games. And then you have the flip side of the coin where other people are also criticizing the article, but they're doing it from the perspective of, oh, good gamer, game journalist can't play games, and so I think it's important to throw those voices out and focus on the individuals like everyone here and others that we know who are speaking in good faith and criticizing as opposed to mocking.
Yeah, it's definitely out there still. I was just going to say that. It's definitely there. Final Fantasy has many elitist and toxic corners. it always has. It's any giant franchise that especially comes from like a nostalgic time or is a really long running franchise will have those pockets, unfortunately. One of the most harassment fueled things I ever experienced on Twitter was when Final Fantasy 15. I'm a massive long running Final Fantasy fan from when I was like 14 years old. I'm 38. I'm older than a lot of people, but like, and I've been into Final Fantasy so long, and then Final Fantasy 15 came out, and I always get the guidebooks. I always like love those big books.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, they're just so beautiful and they're so good, and it's just so satisfying and fun to like really get everything in the game and like do everything and like do it in a way that like is like a slow and steady progression. And that's always been how I've approached them. And when Final Fantasy 15 came out, there was a whole page in the book dedicated to accessibility. And this was where we first saw people, or at least where I first saw people understanding that accessibility is a wider discussion than just things like difficulty modes. And that accessibility isn't just options. It isn't just difficulty modes. It is so much more than that. And there are many ways to achieve accessibility outside of difficulty modes. And that's basically what this page in the guidebook really like summarized for me. And I was just so excited about that as a budding accessibility specialist at the time. This was a few years ago, obviously. And so I literally took a picture on my phone, posted it to Twitter, and was like, how freaking cool is this? This is it. It's happening. Like, it's in a mainstream guidebook and they get it. Like, it's not just like, oh, here's your accessibility options. It's like, here's all the thing in the game that might help you with the accessibility of Final Fantasy 15. And the frog Twitter found me. And I think I got posted on 4chan or something. It was the worst I'm getting emotional, but it was the worst I've experienced outside of 2014, which was, Gamergate. And it's there, and it's still there. Like, it hasn't been as bad this time. Like, I haven't been targeted, touch wood, and I haven't seen anyone else being targeted in that way. I think the world is a bit distracted right now, which helps, sadly. Right. But I've seen it in the replies to, like, there was that PlayStation post that got bumped about, sorry, my cat is PlayStation post that got bumped, and like, if you look at the replies of that, it's mad. Like, it's so many angry people for unfortunate reasons. So it's definitely there. I think we're doing a better job at like having the right people listen. And that's where I've been really refocusing how I approach this and how I pay attention to it. Is I decided after Sekiro, after I posted or published that IGN article that was looking at accessibility beyond difficulty modes and how Souls games have actually been achieving some approachability and accessibility without difficulty modes, and how they might be able to continue to do that if they don't want to use difficulty modes as a tool, because it is just a tool. And so after that, and that got some heat, but it wasn't that bad. I was like really well protected by the community. I got so much response about it changing people's minds and about the way that the new positive way that they look at accessibility now and what it means and how they understand, oh, it's not just difficulty. It's so much more. That was when I was like, okay, I'm going to ignore all that toxic debate, because if I can't change those people's minds with an IGN article, I'm not changing it on Twitter. Like, it's just not going to happen. So now I focus on my development community. I focus on my fellow developers. I focus on helping them understand what it means and what they can do in their work. And I think that's what we really need to do as a community. And I think that's what we're doing better now. This is a really long-winded way of saying that, but that's what I think we're seeing more is that kind of progress.
No, definitely provide context for sure. So, in closing, what would you like to be able to say, like, in regards, like, sort of final words, like, what can we learn, or what, like, for those who are listening or watching this episode, and they're not sort of abreast of the conversation and sort of the nuances and the context of everything that's been happening. What are some of the takeaways that you would like for people to learn and understand from this perspective after seeing this article come out?
Well, as somebody who is able-bodied, I would speak specifically to other able-bodied individuals and say, if the idea of extra accessibility in games bothers you, then I would suggest you go out and actually get involved with individuals who aren't as lucky as you are. I used to kind of, I don't know, just kind of shake my head and go, yeah, whatever, when it comes to accessibility in games. But once you start making friends in the disabled community, you start realizing that, you know, there's a lot in my life that I take for granted. And one, it helped me grow as a person because I'm now far more thankful for everything that I have in regards to my health. But two, I love video games. They're one of my favorite things in the entire world, and I want people to experience that joy and experience that same happiness. And some people simply can't. And once you realize that adding accessibility options, letting everybody play, once you realize that that doesn't affect your experience in any way, shape, or form, you're going to stop caring that it's there. Because nobody's forcing you to use it. You know, you don't have to play it. You don't have to play with accessibility options on if you don't want to. Just understand that there are people who cannot play these games, cannot have this. They who are being locked out of a form of enjoyment that you are not, and it's just not fair. It's just not fair. There's no reason everybody can't play. Period. So if you're an able-bodied person and you're kind of stuck in that mindset, I encourage you to get involved in the disabled community and really, this is gonna sound smug, but really see how, like, understand how well you have it, understand how lucky you are, and some people aren't as fortunate. That's what I would say.
Fair. That's very good. Cherry?
Go ahead, Grant. I'm gonna give you this
Okay.
spot.
I would say to be respectful of people's differing opinions, because at the end of the day, this was Mike's opinion on the game. He wasn't saying remove the feature. He wasn't saying this game is terrible. He was saying for him personally, it was too easy. And I know as a disabled person, I've played dozens of games that I have been fortunate enough to play, but other people with disabilities may not be able to. And whenever they criticize a review or a post that I make about a game, they're not targeting me, they're just saying their experiences. And you have to be cognizant of that. And just be aware that what works for other people may not work for some. And that's okay, as long as you're not being hateful and downright mean toward that person, then it's okay to have different opinions. Because the discourse that I saw throughout all of this was Mike was being unfairly attacked, in my opinion.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I didn't
Yeah.
think that you know, all the hard drive mag are like there
Right.
was another one, and I'm like, oh, come on,
Right.
like, calm down.
And
Right.
I'll be the first one to say I probably was a little bit more angry, more at Kotaku than necessarily him, but I can definitely I could see where it would translate over to Mike, and I've definitely have seen at least learn for myself that I definitely need to change that, and a lot of people I kind of sort of see it as sort of like that's just the Kotaku sort of mentality, but in reality it's not. You like you said, Grant, it's one person's opinion on it and from what he experienced with it. And so I would I basically would like to be able to say that don't bash Mike for this.
Right.
It doesn't do anybody any good.
Well, and as Cherry can attest to, I'm sure, like, dogpiling can lead to severe mental health issues. And as somebody who is a strong mental health advocate, we never want to do that. Especially not over a video game opinion that wasn't given maliciously. I mean, Mike Fahey himself is disabled.
Mhm.
So I mean, yeah, I mean, people need to really do some soul searching on this one, I think.
Yeah, just remember there's another person on the end. I always like to say that about developers too, is don't attack the people. Like, talk about the ideas, talk about the nuance. And the one thing I want to challenge the gaming press to as a developer is to just try to take a step back before you go ahead and publish something. Like, for example, like the way we approached the article I wrote for IGN was we edited that for a solid week. We went through it and we were extremely careful, and we tried to like give a balanced approach. And it was personal, but it was also technical. And so like we had to make that approachable. And like even opinion pieces, I think, can be approached with a little bit more nuance and a little bit more thought to experiences outside of our own. And so aside, like, don't make it personal, but then in the profession also, I would love to see a little bit more understanding of the nuance of accessibility, that so much accessibility can be achieved silently without it being labeled with a big flashing neon accessibility sign, or without it being a difficulty mode. Like, there's so many things in games that actually we're designing that aren't optional, but are there to make the feel better for players, to make it more approachable, make it more accessible. And it's not always obvious. And so I think that's the thing that I want to leave people with myself is, don't make it personal. Remember, there's so much more going on behind the scenes than you will ever be able to fathom. Development is a secretive process for a reason, because we have to be really careful about how we talk about things with players and talk about things with the community, because there is a lot of misunderstanding. There is a lot of jumping to conclusions. And like, I think it's fair to say that like people shouldn't have to understand the technical aspects of game design. And so we want to present that in a way that is a benefit to the player. We don't want to present it in a way that will create misunderstanding or stigma. And so even if a studio isn't saying, hey, this we've done for accessibility, that doesn't mean that people aren't doing that. It just means that they're not necessarily able to talk about it. They're not talking about it for good reasons. And there's always someone on the other end. And just try and think about it from a nuanced perspective. Ask yourself, what do I not know about this situation? This is my opinion, but what else is beyond that? What else is going on, and what nuance is there? And I think that will make us all better at our jobs. And like, that is what I want to leave people with, I think.
Yeah, and I echo all y'all's thoughts on that. You definitely said it much better than I could ever sort of come up with an equivalent. I can't even get the words out right. Yeah, it's just I needed a better thesaurus. That's what I needed. And so I want to thank the three of you for coming on. And so before we let you go, Grant, why don't you say where we can be able to find you / stalk you online?
Sure. You can read my bylines in IGN, Washington Post, and Can I Play That? And you can also find me online at SuperCrypt1994. It's at Super_Crypt1994.
Cool. Cherry?
I am just Cherry Ray everywhere. CherryRae. Twitch, Twitter, the internet. Just search it, you'll find me.
And John?
Cherry, first I want to point out that I am actually older than you, so don't feel too bad.
Yay, OG Final Fantasy fans.
Yeah, right. I will be 40 this year, so
Nice.
really. No, it's not nice. Don't say that. It really.
You don't look a day over 30, John.
Except for all the gray hair.
I'm blind. I couldn't see it anyway.
You can find me at Mr. Megative on Twitter. Megative with an M, not an N. People constantly get that one wrong. And I would also highly recommend you check out our podcast on Twitter at official SDGC, and we're on Twitch, twitch.tv/official SDGC. So please come.
And speaking of podcasts, I definitely want to recommend coming soon. John and I will be chatting. We have an episode that we've already recorded that will be coming out on Access Granted in regards to being in the military and video games and how video games can help those who are veterans. It's an amazing conversation. I can't wait for y'all to be able to hear that. That'll be coming very soon. So make sure you subscribe to Access Granted. Also, Cherry, we had an amazing conversation before, so if you haven't listened to that episode or watched that episode, definitely go check it out. Again, search for Access Granted on your favorite podcast service, and you can be able to find that conversation there. And also, if you are able to rate and review the show on iTunes, I know it's kind of the only place to be able to kind of rate and review it, but it'll definitely help out the show and be able to get it to hopefully a much larger audience, as this conversation is definitely important to talk about, at least within the video game industry. So I want to thank the three of you for joining me today. We'll definitely, Grant, we're going to have you on at some point individually. We'll chat at some point for sure.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be great. So thank you all for watching / listening. And if you want to be able to find me, I'm at Steve Saylor on Twitter and Instagram, youtube.com/snowball. Access Granted on every podcast service, and mixer.com/BlindGamerSteve whenever I'm streaming online, which is random and don't have a set schedule, but whatever. Thank you all, and as always, I remain obedient to yours. Bye, everybody.